living?
What I like most about living, I like my friends and my family. I like music. I don't think I could manage for long without music. I like singing. I don't get to do enough of it. And I suppose, as you'd expect me to say, I do like anchorage in the life of faith. And I like I like trying to be the kind of human that the life of faith suggests it's possible to be.
What's on your music playlist?
Mostly Bach.
All right.
Instrumental and choral. I'm really, really boring about music. I'm afraid I have very conventional tastes. And they tend to come to an end around 1750. I've got a few extensions. I've got a weakness for one or two bands from my youth, like the Incredible String Band and Steel Eye Spam.
I don't even know who they are.
Ask me afterwards. Ask me afterwards.
Singing.
Singing.
Is there a song you would, a hymn that you would want at your funeral? Or a song?
There are loads of hymns I'd like at my funeral. I'll be sorry to miss it, really. At least, you know.
Well.
No, I've got a real weakness for two kinds of hymns. I love the old medieval hymns, plain song hymns, but I also have a huge devotion to Charles Wesley.
Oh, I'd love to hear that as a Methodist.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, we are. And I think "And Can It Be" is the finest hymn in the English language. But there's also, of course, the whole Welsh strand in my background. And there are hymns in Welsh that are particularly important to me. And they would mean very much to people here, but they mean a great deal to me. So, Williams Paterkellin, the great 18th century Welsh hymn writer, he writes a lot about the wilderness and walking over wet, cloudy hills. I don't know where you can get that from living in Wales. So, yes, that's a big theme. The one everybody knows in English, "Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer," is, of course, all about pilgrimage, but there are much better ones than that. And there's another 19th century hymn, which is, well, used to be very, very popular at Welsh language funerals. And the imagery in it is from the hills of Jerusalem. I look back and see the whole length of the journey. The whole journey through the wilderness. Now you can see it. I'm always lives up to that one.
What's the tune?
It begins.
Beautiful. I asked about the funeral. I didn't expect to ask this, but what do you think? This is right in. We talked about. What do you think happens when we die?
I believe that God displays his faithfulness to us. In other words, that whatever we are, whatever we have been, whatever we have made ourselves, is held in the love of God. And that's all I'm sure of. What that means in practice, what it looks like or feels like, I don't know, except that whatever in my life now most kindles that sense of a faithful God, a God committed to me, I believe will deepen in that. And as I say, I have no real theories about it. I have plenty of images, as we all have, but that's my trust. And I've sometimes said that when I'm asked about life after death, I say I'm not particularly interested in the immortality of the soul or speculations about that, because the Christian belief, I'd say, is not a belief about something that's in me, but about something that's in God. God's commitment, God not letting go of whatever God has made. That's what I take my stand on.
is there an image that, you said you don't have theories, but you have images. Is there an image that's consoling for you or challenging for you, or both?
All kinds of images, but I love the end of Dante's Commedia, where Dante finally finds himself in the presence of God. And he says, suddenly it's like seeing a circle squared. You can't put it all together with ideas, but you're in the middle of something. And he talks about these concentric rings of light, and 3 concentric rings of light that sort of surround you. And in the middle of it all is a human face. And you're brought into that. That's it. That's almost unimprovable, I think.
Dante's sort of Marmite, but that's that definitely brings me back to the Dante camp.
Good. I have not lived in vain.
In the podcast, there are loads of folks who are haven't had contact with traditional religions, or who have and have left for various reasons, but lots of folks who are on spiritual journeys that might be seen by the church as alternative or different with other traditional religions, but largely not. And there are, I think, an increasing number of folks who call themselves agnostic or atheist, but are still somehow on a spiritual journey, are open to wonder. And you speak as someone who likes to teach people about faith and teach about. How are you so sure there is a God? And how are you so sure or confident that this God is so endlessly giving and loving?
Like every believer, I guess there's a whole range of things that brings me to that place of confidence. I don't think there's any one set of arguments that will work. If there were, we'd probably have thought of it by now. And the whole world would be full of people saying, oh yes, I never thought of that. And actually that's not quite how it works in the pub or anywhere else. But most of us grow in certain ways by taking risks. In an image I find quite helpful, we find what's load-bearing in our lives. You know, we test the durability of people, language, images, ideas. We find that something will carry us. And that's a very diverse process of learning, testing, trusting. And I've been fortunate, I've been blessed in having people in whose lives I've seen that kind of trusting and risking, producing lives of transparency, depth, generosity. And I just think, well, I wouldn't mind living like that, if that's how it plays out. So it's nebulous. It's not that you can say, well, there it is, and slap it down on the table, and everybody says, oh yes. But sometimes it's worth saying, look, hang around in the company of people taking these sorts of risks. See if you feel these are risks worth taking. And that's itself a very risky thing to invite people to do, because I hate to break it to you, but a lot of Christians have historically and are presently not absolutely clearly generous, imaginative, deep and compassionate, and lots of people go away profoundly hurt by their encounter with Christian communities, and always have done, and the church has bought into a whole range of stupidly repressive and sometimes really destructive patterns of behaviour. So when I want to say, take the risk of hanging around with people who are, as they believe, in the company of Jesus, well, yeah, it's risky. But the thing is, and I believe this with all my heart, it's the resources within that tradition of Christian faith that allow people to see more clearly when it goes wrong. You can be outraged by sexual abuse, bigotry, racism in the church because of what the church itself keeps feeding, keeps telling you. If you look at the pre-Christian world, there wasn't very much in the way of resources that would help you. to identify, to call out certain kinds of inhumanity. The gospel comes and says inhumanity matters like anything because human beings are made in the image of God and loved by Christ. So, for anyone in or out of the church to be involved in dehumanizing, in rejecting and oppressing, is all that more outrageous, and we know it precisely because of, I don't know if I'm putting that clearly, but somebody once said to me years and years ago, the thing about the church is that it trains its critics. It gives believers the standards, the ideals, the vision to challenge the church itself.
I love that. I remember talk about sort of theologies and witnesses that help people discover themselves. And I remember being a young, newly Christian, recently out of the closet person, and coming into contact with an essay that you wrote called The Body's Grace.
That's right.
A long time ago. And I've over the years kind of, when we talk about the church and its harm and its blessing, I found myself caught up as a disciple of Christ in both receiving the blessing of the church and also being deeply challenged by the church, but also someone who hopefully has offered blessing and has also hurt people, in that sense of how do you hold that that being human, both spiritual gold and miracle, and to speak to sort of use Francis Spufford's definition of sin, with the propensity to F things up at the same time. How do you hold that?
Quite a lot of Christians reflecting on that have said that to be in the image of a free and creating God means that there is, back to risk again, there's a riskiness in all human life. And it's as if the stakes are higher when our humanity is given such extravagant liberty and creativity as God has given it. The stakes are higher. We can get things wronger. And that's part of the answer to how you hold that. One great Anglican writer of the last century, Charles Williams, liked to say that, and I'm not entirely endorsing this, but I sort of see what he means, he liked to say that hell was an enormous compliment to human beings, in that you had the capacity to do something so spectacularly awful to yourself that it was more or less incurable. Now, we could argue about that.
Here comes Dante.
But you can see a bit, I think, what he's after there. And then that comes back to the fundamental fact that when we talk about our humanity, we talk about it in the context of this faithful God, the promise-keeping God, the God who does not give up on us. And very often, Christians will say far more about God by saying, I trust God to heal me from my failures and my sins, than by saying, look at how holy I am, and how eloquently I reflect God or speak about God. And the truly repentant person, the person who can actually look at themselves and say, that was impossible, and I have the courage to put one foot in front of the other because of God. That says something.
And I love that. I love the church. So I came into the church as a young adult, but some years into being a Christian, a committed Christian, and being ordained, I got sober, and which was sort of the second of many kind of repentances and awakenings. Our migrant voices, we might be clearer about what others think we might have cause to be proud of in this country, which I thought was such an unexpected turn. And I wonder if there's anything else you'd say about the state we find ourselves in the so-called West, around migration and being siblings in Christ and other faiths and none.
Within and behind the controversies and disagreements about exact policies on how we handle immigration in this country, there remains, I think, a profound spiritual question. Are we confident of and grateful for what we've inherited in terms of a tradition of hospitality? Because hospitality is somehow, suggests in the New Testament, a very fundamental Christian priority. When people talk about preserving Christian civilization or Christian culture in this country at the expense of that hospitality, I think I'm not quite sure what they're talking about there. But I think it is something to be proud of, that we have been trusted by people. And what an extraordinary thing that this country is trusted to be a safe place. Now, you may or may not like this or that immigration policy, but just hang on to that. There are people out there in nightmare situations who think that this country is a safe place, not just for us, but for them. Now that, I thought, is something to be thankful for. What if we were thought to be, universally thought to be, a systematically unwelcoming, a systematically dehumanizing place? Well, we may find out before very long if some people get their hands on the levers, but meanwhile, and I suppose the final thing to say about that in a more global setting is, yes, it's not looking good here or in the States. I think of the Welsh elections coming up next year, which I'm a bit concerned about, I must say. And yet, if all that we've been talking about this evening makes any sense at all, there is something that will always go on stirring under the soil in us, that people will just not be satisfied with a less than humane culture and civilization. They may put up with any amount of cruelty and folly and murderous stupidity, as we see at the moment, and yet, somewhere underneath it, there's the thing that won't quite do. There's more to us than that. I don't think that's going to go away.
Thank you. We need to come to a close to honor another interview that Rowan